And this is one of the most beautiful I've been in. I also have been starting these, because this is a book that just came out, so I don't expect that most anyone who's read any of it. I started by just reading a few pages from the prologue. So if you don't mind, I'll read to you. Any objection? This is not court. I will. Here we go. Prologue. A hot, gauzy morning in the late summer of 1987. That was the first time I ever laid eyes on the streets of Los Angeles. I was 13 years old, but looked 10 at best, an agonizingly shy Texas boy with eyes like water, hair like the sun, and a tanker truck's worth of secrets. I was jammed in the backseat of my mom's massive yellow Malibu Classic between my little brother Todd and our stinking cat Airborne. My mom said we were on the move. Others would have called it on the run. Days earlier, my family had packed up what little we had of value and vanished without notice from our lives in the Lone Star State, leaving behind my middle school in San Antonio and our Morgan church in the Randolph ward, heading west. My mom was behind the wheel, her hairspray stiffened curls resting on worried shoulders as she worked the hand controls to speed up and slow down her beast of a car, a colossal artifact from a former life that now had to be wrested into submission by a woman who walked on crutches, her legs in braces, her spine fused and held together with metal bars hidden just beneath the scars that ran the length of her body. My big brother Marcus sat up front beside her. His hair was just as long as hers, but kissing a black leather punk rock jacket covered in pins and buttons that shouted obscenities my mom had miraculously, if not willfully, grown blind to. He had a map spread out on his lap. We were lost. We were scared. But in good Southern Mormon fashion, we kept our terrors to ourselves. Yeah. You guys can't. Did anyone hear that?
Yeah. It's not on.
Do I need this?
Yes. Yes.
Is it working?
No.
This is a disaster. It says dead battery.
Oh, that's funny.
Is this turned on? Yeah, that's turned on. All right, how about can you hear me if I really project? Because I can project. All right, I'm going to use my theater skills. There we go. I'm not going to go back though. People can hear that enough, right? We're in a car. We're heading west. We're on the run. Great. My big brother Marcus sat up front beside me. His hair was just as long as hers, but kissing a black leather punk rock jacket covered in pins and buttons that shouted obscenities my mom had miraculously, if not willfully, grown blind to. He had a map spread out on his lap. We were lost. We were scared. But in good Southern Mormon fashion, we kept our terrors to ourselves. Here's the thing. We've been taught our entire lives that places like Los Angeles were filled with folks who traded their souls and salvation for fame, booze, drugs, cash, cars, heterosex, group sex, and that dirty, filthy, fat sex. Los Angeles was the embodiment of an unfamiliar, exotic America that we've been warned to avoid. Liberal, often coastal, a place for sinners and moral relativists. For our ragtag family on the run, passage through this city was a test of spiritual strength. So we plugged our noses in back. Marcus did his best to navigate up front, and my tiny runaway mom rotated the hand control that turned the gear, that pressed down on the gas pedal that she hoped might propel us to safety. 2 hours later, Marcus and my mom finally spotted the entrance to the 5 freeway heading north. The terrain grew steeper as we headed into the hills and over the grapevine, a stretch of highway out of LA, where the snarl of traffic gave way to golden grasses, a reservoir lake, ranches, and a meadow filled with wildflowers. These were more familiar scenes. This felt more like home. My mom looked up into her rearview mirror, found my eyes, and with all of her mighty love and warmth, sent me a strong, silent message. You're safe now, Answer. I took a breath or two, pulled out a pen and a spiral notebook, and wrote a letter to a girl back in San Antonio. She and I had recently participated in a one-act drama competition. She played Eve, I played Adam. Her mom was our drama teacher. I described Los Angeles as the second gayest city in the world. It wasn't a compliment. I was already fairly certain that San Francisco was in first position, thanks to AIDS hitting the national news when old Hollywood heartthrob Rock Hudson fell out of his closet and into his grave. Since then, even the news shows in Texas had started offering up images of emaciated gay men, most in San Francisco, but others in New York and Los Angeles, dying terrible deaths thanks to their, quote, lifestyle choices. So yes, it seemed that San Francisco was the closest to hellfire, but I was fairly certain Los Angeles wasn't far behind. I suppose I felt it necessary to let someone in Texas know I'd survived our journey through this foreign land. But as we reached the top of the mountain, something in my God-fearing heart stirred. And I looked back toward the city. It was calling to me. If I'm being honest, it had started calling well before we set out on this adventure. If Los Angeles was dangerous, I was curious. How true were the stories I'd heard? Did the people there really do so many strange things to their bodies, their minds, and one another? Did they really make all of those movies and TV shows I'd fallen in love with on the rare occasions we were allowed to watch them? And the most dangerous question of all, did the nation's current teen heartthrob, Ricky Schroeder, with his golden hair and ocean blue eyes, actually live somewhere down in all that chaos? That question, and all of its invasive roots and sticky webs, lingered longest in my mind as I watched the city glimmer and shine in the morning sun until it slowly disappeared behind a veil of blue-white smog.
Yay!
That's just the, oh wow. That would have been so much better. I'm gonna hand this to you though, because I am no longer in charge. I have done my duty.
Maybe mine works, does it? Absolutely not. Do you want to hand off or just
I'm gonna hand it to you.
Okay,
Yeah, and then you can hand it back.
great.
And at some point, maybe. No.
We'll find out.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. I like the LA specific reading. Do you change that for each one?
No.
Okay. The subtitle of your book is called A Story from Our Americas, plural Americas. Can you just explain to everyone what you mean by that and like why that choice of words?
Sure. You know, it sort of goes to the question, why write this book right now? And I'll tell you, I was pitching this book about 2 years ago, and the original subtitle was A Story from Two Americas. And that was the assumption. That was what I think so many of us have been told and fed, which is that there are these two Americas, and you sort of define which one you're in based on what you've put on your voter registration card, or who you voted for president. And that's just not the way my mom and I had lived our life. I mean, just to give a little bit away, you know, my mom was Mormon, as it said in the book, and military. We grew up in the South. She's from Louisiana. Then we were in Arkansas and Texas. Very conservative, but she was also paralyzed from the age of 2. And that meant that by the time I came around, and by the time my biological father decided to disappear on us, I was 6 years old, my little brother was 2 years old, my big brother is 10 years old, and we're raising my mom as much as she's raising us. And even though she's incredibly conservative, and I'm really realizing I'm a gay kid, I know I have a crush on the boy down the street. I know I'm not going to be accepted in my home for who I am. I also knew that me and my mom had to figure it out. We had to find the bridges between us. And we were very, very close. And so we had to figure out whether R and D on a voter registration card was truly the highest plane of existence or not. And it sounds absurd, doesn't it? I mean, imagine in this glorious home we have, this planet Earth, this universe we live in, and this gift we have to have these eyes and these ears to witness it, these hearts to feel it, that you say, hey, what you put on that voter registration card, that R or that D, is the very highest plane of existence as a human being in this miraculous universe. It sounds absurd. But it seems to me it's what the country increasingly believes. And it's actually what I set out to do in the book, was to see if there are bridges between these two Americas. And as soon as I started to show the courage my mom had always shown, and we can go into that, show the curiosity she had always shown, and to do in this book, at least in the last third, what I had not been courageous enough to do, which was to start to explore these different Americas, to go back to Arkansas, to go back to Texas, and to go back to Salt Lake City, Utah. It very quickly became clear that there are many Americas, and they're certainly not defined by R&D or whether you voted for Donald Trump or not. There's many more variations than that. And the subtitle is a hopeful one. It says that there are many, but hopefully, like a family with a lot of kids who are very, very different from one another, they can also be ours. And we can show love and curiosity. But that's going to have to go both ways, not just expecting conservatives to come to progressives and learn. We have to start to figure out how to go back to our homes and our hometowns and our families and have those conversations. So to me, it's an embrace. This book is an embrace. It's a story from our American family, from our Americas.
I love that. And wait, you got it. Hold on.
What's that?
Yeah.
I love that, and it's something that I think a lot about, which is that we talk about how divided we are, and relationships with our family and other people, it is complicated, and there's lots of ambiguity, and that's okay. You don't just write people off, right?
I mean, we do. And
we do wrongly, though. I think of it as like cancel culture. A celebrity makes one mistake, and we knock them down because we need them to be perfect. And yet that has crossed over into our personal lives too, where, you voted for Donald Trump, and so now I can't look you in the eye.
I mean, it's hard. I have to say, just to ruin more and more of this book. Has anyone read it yet? Just someone lied. Yeah, all right, good. I'm not going to ruin it for you, but for the rest of you, I'm going to ruin some things. When I came out to my mom, I didn't do it on purpose. It was, she figured it out. She was ranting and raving about don't ask, don't tell, because it was clear that Bill Clinton was going to sign it, and for her it was too inclusive. To her, it meant there were a way for gay and lesbian people to be in her military if they stayed closeted, and she didn't want these people that the church had taught her were sinners, that the state of Texas said were criminals, right? That her military said weren't good enough to work for them for generations, so why now? She didn't want them to be a part of it, and she was ranting and raving on Christmas evening. And I was praying, I'm sitting there in the room with her, and I'm praying that I don't start to cry. Because I didn't want her to find out. I was not ready to come out and to lose my mother, which is what I was sure was going to happen. And then I felt the first tear on my cheek. And a good Southern mom can read tears like they can read tea leaves. And she knew right then and there. And I won't go into all the details, but it did not go well. But my mom, my good Southern conservative Mormon mom, had the courage and was curious enough to get on a plane and fly to this city and to have conversations with some of my LGBTQ friends. Now, I copped out and I hadn't told my friends that my mom hadn't accepted me because I didn't want them to know that. That was too painful an admission. So they were very candid with her, but they were candid with her in this way that I've come to see as incredibly valuable. They didn't come at her with facts or science or law or the Constitution. There was no debating. They were simply telling her the story of their coming out, of their either rejections or acceptance. And because a good Southern mom can also nod you to death like the best listener in the world, well, she's probably also judging you harshly. They kept talking and telling their stories. And by the end of that evening, my mom and I were alone in the room, and she brought me over and sat with me. And that night, there were tears in both of our eyes. I thought I was in big trouble, but instead she gave me the warmest, most accepting hug I've ever felt. And I knew for the first time she loved me for me. And because she'd shown courage to come out to LA and the curiosity to hear those stories, it had dispelled in one evening all of those myths she'd heard from the church, the lies she'd heard from the military and from Texas, and she began to take steps towards acceptance, true acceptance. Now, those conversations weren't easy for her to hear. It wasn't easy for her to sit across from my lesbian friends and their Doc Martens explaining how lesbians do it, or my gay friends who were talking about the unique challenges for gay men and hygiene in sex, and all these things they felt comfortable telling her, which were horrific for me to see and witness. But she sat there through it, and through all the emotional and beautiful stories as well, and it changed her. And so, when I lost my mom, one of the things that made me want to write this book was that challenge to see if I could show the same courage and curiosity. And that means, yes, getting on a plane to Texarkana, Texas, and sitting with my cousin Lynn, who is incredibly conservative, has been very homophobic in the past. We've not always gotten along. But could we have these conversations that would find a higher plane in politics? And with him, it was much more fun because we had some Crown Royal, and we had some more and some more. And at a certain point, I started talking about this new guy I was dating who lived in the United Kingdom, and he was an athlete, and he was, I was like spending all this time away from work, and it was making me crazy. And instead of him judging it, he pulled out his phone and showed me this girl he's been dating, and the trips she's been making him go on. And at a certain point, we're both drunk and just lamenting the fact that these two people we're in love with are going to make us go broke. And I realized we found our higher plane in politics. And my good cousin Lynn, I won't tell you, ruin the whole story, but he showed up at the Cathedral of Hope 3 days ago in his overalls for my book signing for this. And he posted about it on Facebook. And yes, I had to put up with listening to him and how much he loves Donald Trump and all of that, but you know what? We were finding some common ground, and that common ground had to do with family, and we found that common ground because we took that extra step past just arguing about the law and the Constitution and science, because we both thought we were right about that. And we found the personal stories that illuminated those issues. And the book is going to go into, when you read it, an even more challenging step that I felt I had to take, which was to do the same thing with the Mormon Church in Utah.
I want to go back to what you just said though about like talking and sharing stories with family members, because I think I want to know what is the takeaway for people who go to their family that might be unaccepting, and the takeaway is don't talk about politics, don't talk about legislation and issues, but just share your own stories. Is that putting words in your mouth?
Well, yeah, but I like those words. I mean, I think those words I found to be most effective, and I think we've fallen for the trap that we see on 24-hour news channels, which is this idea that we can debate the facts and the science and the law and somehow ever get to some common ground. And it's just not the way it works. I mean, I am absolutely convinced that science and the law and the Constitution are on the side of LGBT equality. Let me tell you, the other side are just as convinced that's not true. And all you do when you're talking outside of yourself, which all those things are outside of ourselves, those are all ideas, some of them good ideas, but they're ideas, is we don't get personal. So, and we're going to continue to disagree. And that means that we're just digging our trenches deeper. And I don't think some people say, oh, that's so soft and fuzzy, and I'm like, no, you're not getting it. It's actually much harder work. Because right now, if you're thinking about your arguments for equality, whether that's LGBT equality, gender inequality, whatever it might be, and you're thinking about the law, and you're thinking about the science, you're thinking about the facts. Those are good, hold on to those. But now you have to take that extra step to figure out the story, hopefully your own, that illuminates those facts, illuminates that science, makes personal the Constitution, and share that story. It's not soft and fuzzy, it's harder work. But that sort of work and sharing those personal stories actually does something that we almost never see on our political news or hear from our politicians, which is those personal stories can actually start to change a heart. It's what we learned in the marriage equality fight. And when you start to change a heart, then you can change a mind. It doesn't go from here to here. It goes this direction, always. And when you get this change, then you can start to change a family, heal that, a community, and maybe a country. And we know it when we hear it. We know it when we hear a politician telling a true personal story, and we also know it when we hear a story from a politician and it's bullshit. So I encourage people to look into their hearts for the stories that will illuminate the Constitution.
And then for you personally, someone who tells stories on TV and film, for your family who you're talking to, like Cousin Lynn, how much did also them seeing these queer characters on screen help, that you've helped write?
I don't think they help as much. I mean, I think, that's a crazy thing to say about your own work, but I do believe that there is a direct connection between the storytelling efforts that we make as filmmakers and why it was a natural leap for, say, the four of us really, me, Rob Reiner, Bruce Cohen, and Chad Griffin. Of those four I just named, 3 are storytellers and filmmakers, and one works in politics. And it was the 4 of us who sued the state of California in federal court for marriage equality. And we knew in our gut that we had to put to do what we had done on the screen in person. But we also knew it can't be impersonal. There's still something a bit impersonal about that screen. And so we said to our lawyers from the very beginning, when you go on the news shows, we're going to be telling the stories of our plaintiffs. But what's even better is if we can put our plaintiffs on the news shows to tell their stories, right? Because we get it. You've got to look people in the eye. And we also knew that all we were trying to do by filing those court cases and helping people to tell their stories, encouraging and letting our plaintiff stories lead the way, was to encourage people to take to the most powerful stage there is, and to do the most courageous thing you can on that biggest, most powerful stage that is. And that most powerful stage in the world, I believe, is the dining room table. And the most courageous thing you can do is be personal on that stage and in that setting. It's actually more difficult than making a movie. Not to disparage what I do. I hope that what I do, I'm keenly aware, mostly invigorates and informs and bolsters the choir. I love Milk, but I'm keenly aware that the core audience for Milk are minorities who can draw inspiration from someone standing up for themselves and giving hope. And there's a place for that. But when it comes to really changing minds, I want to motivate other people to get out there and tell their stories over the dining room table. That's what this book is about.
Wait, so if movies like Milk aren't changing the hearts and minds of America, if that's not the number one way, what is the point then? Why do you choose to make something like that?
Well, I think Milk, listen, I do hope that in some ways these movies do sometimes break through. That some people, I hear many times youngsters will say to me, hey, I shared that with my mom and my dad, and it made a difference. So sometimes it can. The more powerful thing I think it can do is set a great example, right? So I hope that by telling the story of Milk, it inspires not just LGBT people to demand the full thing, not just crumbs, to understand that if we're ever going to have our equality, that we have to build coalitions. I think that was a big lesson in Milk, especially on the heels of Proposition 8 passing, where the gay community completely forgot to build coalitions. I think it inspires us, it bolsters us, and at its best, stories from history, I believe, are not nostalgic. They are a reminder and a motivation to the future, to not make the same mistakes again. So I am keenly aware that we're mostly preaching to the choir. Now, hopefully you've written that in a way that the choir is bigger than just LGBT people. But it's mostly going to be a choir of the coalition of the yeses, is what Harvey would have called it. In this case, racial minorities, women for certain, and seniors, and workers. That was the coalition he built, and I hope it resonates with those folks.
That's fascinating. Going back to the book, you mentioned in the prologue, but your mom was in like braces and crutches for most of her life. She had polio as a kid. And she worked at Walter Reed, the famous Army Medical Center. And you write really movingly about why that work was so meaningful to her, but not just the work, but walking in the hospital every day. Do you mind telling that story here?
Sure. I mean, my mom was a firecracker, but she couldn't move anything from the chest down since she was 2 years old. But she understood, because I think of what it took for her to survive, and she nearly died many a time, including once while she was having me. She went into cardiac arrest. She liked to remind me of that when she wanted me to vacuum the and so she understood the power of hope. She had been told she would never fall in love, never have kids. It was too dangerous. She'd proven that wrong. She was told she would never have a career. And so she worked very, very hard to not only become a microbiologist, but to get to a place where she ran one of the most advanced laboratories in the nation at the most esteemed Army Medical Hospital in the nation, Walter Reed Army Medical, where the president, she always liked to say to me, it's where the president goes for care. I was keenly aware that my mom, and she will not let me forget it, would run tests on the president's blood, spit, and urine. There were several presidents under her reign at this hospital, but she understood what hope meant. And so my mom, I think you mean the story of setting a fine example. How do we set that example? So she would walk in on her braces and crutches through the front doors of Walter Reed Army Medical Center, after parking in the parking lot, refusing to use a handicap placard, and this is Washington, D.C., so it's icy ground and snow, because in that lobby were the most difficult, challenging cases of soldiers returning at this point from Iraq and Afghanistan, and most missing limbs, many severely burned, almost completely in wheelchairs. And she liked to walk through there like a pendulum. She couldn't really walk. She should have been in a wheelchair. She had her spine fused when she was a kid so that she could be on crutches. And she was keenly aware that these young men who might have lost so much hope in what their future could look like were watching a little 5'0" woman walking like a pendulum into that hospital to rule that goddamn place like the queen she was. And she did, and they called her the queen of the ma'ams. And when she walked in, they'd be like, good morning, ma'am. She'd be like, good morning, sir. Good morning, sir. And they would flirt with her. And my poor stepdad, who worked at that same army hospital, had to bear it day after day after day. And my favorite stories with that is that she always had this huge bag with her that was filled with so many things, and it had to be awfully heavy. And the young men, especially in the wheelchairs, would offer to help. They'd go, ma'am, can I carry that bag for you? And she'd always turn on them and she'd say, no, but you can come by my lab, and I can teach you how to walk on braces and crutches, so you can carry it back like this one day too. And that was my mom.
Since your mom has died, you've become a parent yourself. Has that made you re-look at your relationship with her in a new way?
I mean, now you're just trying to make me cry. Yeah, of course. I don't know how my mom did it. And that's literally, I don't know how she did it. I have the most beautiful, cute, loving little 10-month-old with 6 teeth coming in once, and I miss him so horribly right now. And he's a handful. So how a woman raised a 2-year-old, a 6-year-old, and a 10-year-old on her own, I genuinely don't understand it. I don't know, and I would give anything to be able to ask her literally, how do you change a 2-year-old's diaper while your 6-year-old is writing on the walls with crayons? Like, how do you handle that? You know, and also you start to, I just have so many questions, like, did I do that at that age? But I'll never have those answers.
And how long has she been gone for?
I guess 4 years now.
What has been most surprising about grief?
I mean, when you read this book, and I hope you guys read this book, you know, there was a period for the last 5 years, and I'm trying not to ruin every little bit of the plot of it, but where it's almost as if, like, a plane went down with almost everyone who I knew and loved. And, you know, whether it was friends and drugs, or family members and cancer, just wiping everyone out, young and old. And, I mean, it doesn't go away, I think, is the big thing for me. It's always there with you, and that's okay. I've learned that it's okay to keep that. But this book goes into a little bit about what the responsibility of the living is. And those were the big questions that I think motivate the book. I know that my mom would not be okay with divisions in my family. She would certainly not be okay with the divisions we were seeing and feeling throughout Texas and our communities. And she would not stand for how our American family is being ripped apart. You know, she was a patriot. I mean, she was a paralyzed woman who figured out how to work for the army because she loved it. If she had her legs, I'm pretty sure she would have served. That's who she was. So I did understand that I had a responsibility to try to pay her message forward, which is that courage and curiosity and compassion live on that higher plane than political partisanship. And, you know, I think one of the things that it did do, well, all that loss, is it meant I ended up moving to London, and I ended up moving my husband's way. And that's given me this very unique perspective on this country, living abroad and traveling to all the places that Tom competes, and it's become incredibly clear to me in a way that was only ever academic, that Americans are so very unique. We really are different than people in any other country I've experienced. We're a little weird. We're a little peculiar. We certainly see things like democracy. You know, the American dream is a very unique thing to us. What aspiration means, what we believe we should be able to achieve, that's very unique to us. And how we see community and family is a little bit different. And it is a family. It becomes very clear we are a family, which breaks your heart even deeper when you're seeing it from afar being ripped apart for no good fucking reason. Sorry, God. It becomes very upsetting. So, in many ways, the loss that I experienced has given me the opportunity to see our world a little bit differently, and hopefully it's motivated me to take some action.
And going off that, family is such a strong concept to you and your family. Does that also extend it out to your chosen family, not blood related?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I mean, not everyone in here, but a lot of us in here are LGBT folks. I certainly am. You are, I think. And so
Don't tell us about that.
For many of us, particularly of a certain generation that I know I'm in, I don't think you are, but we really had to, the family we had, for many of us, is the family we chose and built. Right? And it goes into this, I mean, I've said that 1,000 times in the book, but it was really, I was driving into West Hollywood today, on the way to the hotel just like a couple hours ago, and remarking how much West Hollywood has changed. You know, now it's bustling and you know, just a big kind of party scene. And that was always a little bit of a part of it, but back in the early 90s, when I first landed there and came out, I'm really dating myself, there were families. You had to kind of belong to a clique, and there were different cliques, and there were sort of like, there were father figures in many of these cliques, and mother figures in some of these cliques, and you sort of bonded in that way. You had your different homes. Some people were like at, what was it, the Six Galleries, anyone remember that? Or at the Abbey, when the Abbey was just this tiny little thing with these machines you could put quarters in and play chess with people across the world, this thing called the internet that we were sure would never last.
You wrote that it was not safe to walk down the street alone in West Hollywood at this time.
You could walk down the street, it was much more narrow, but I would hear people shout, you know, homophobic things out their window or throw a bottle. What you didn't do was go into walk back to your car alone. And sadly, it just takes a search of the news from, you know, the, I guess, late 80s into the early 90s to hear about some of the bashings that went on there. And you just wouldn't do that. But then again, it was the safest place we knew of. And it just meant that you had, you know, some of your brothers or sisters walk back to the car with you.
Yeah.
That's just what you did.
After you came out, the first gay bar you went to as an out gay man was Mickey's, which is still there. Should we go? Part of this conversation will be there.
There's a lot less clothing in Mickey's these days. Less clothing. Yeah. And more like showers and like G-strings, I think.
Showers?
I don't know. Yes, I'm not going into it because you're going to podcast. But yeah, there's a lot of fun to be had at Mickey's that you didn't have back then. Then it was just like the underage, not underage, but like under 21 bar, so I could get in.
So what was that first day like though when you were there as a man? Because you had some gay friends but weren't out, then you came out. I guess what I'm getting at, one thing that stood out to me, I'll answer the question.
Yeah, please, because I'm like, I don't know, there's some people in here who I know, who I used to hang out at Mickey's, and they already know the answer to this stuff.
Well, something that stood out to me is that like throughout the book, you wrote about yourself in fairly negative ways. At one point, you described yourself as ugly. You didn't have a lot of friends growing up, a couple close friends, but that's it. And at these gay bars, finally you were there and men were very attracted to you. And I felt like that maybe took like a mental shift in your mind.
Well, it also just, this is like gay culture 101. I'm a queer kid from Texas, right? There was a certain image of what hot was, and I wasn't it. You know, you needed to be like 6'2" and like have lots of muscles and shave twice a day, and you know, like the Marlboro Man. Like that was a man. That was supposed to be hot. So I knew I was outside of that. I had no confidence, and certainly I was this skinny little blonde kid who couldn't grow a hair anywhere except on my head, and that was down to like right here, right, this big blonde bob. So little did I know that when I walk into West Hollywood, I was like the fucking prize. I was